As Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana prepares to deliver his budget on Wednesday, he has pointed out the funding challenges in essential services such as education and healthcare as a justification for the proposed 2 percentage point VAT increase. In KwaZulu-Natal only, budget constraints have put around 19,000 teaching jobs at risk, posing a serious threat to education in the province. The Public Servants Association has criticized the government's fiscal management, blaming negligence and misplaced priorities for the crisis. To explore this further, we are now joined by the Public Service Commission chairperson, Professor Somadoda Fikeni. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Looking at the balancing act that the minister or either all ministers of finance have had to done, the difficulty is always around how do you ensure that you have a quality public service that is being delivered, while at the same time you don't have enough money, revenue that is coming through the fiscus. What's your assessment around what the state is, around decisions that have been taken previously that would have led to lapses in service delivery?
Well, I do think that there are certain things that ought not to be compromised in terms of essential services. But that can only be done as you try to balance your budget by a targeted approach in terms of efficiencies of the state, for example. Of course, that may not be sufficient. You'd still have to raise tax or borrow money. But to have moral authority, when you start with improving efficiencies within the state itself, the travels abroad, the travels across the country, how many people are in those delegations, and you make that tighter. And you do have people who have been on suspension with full pay for years. And if you start radically eradicating that, and those who are on long leave, wherein you find that a person has somebody acting in their roles. And when you come to essential services, the country ought to have a serious discussion. When we say money goes to education or money goes to this, where exactly in education? Is it the teacher and the classroom and the learning material, or is it all other things besides the core? Because that's where I think much of the public discourse get lost. Because very often we think that you have a bloated public service only to find that in certain areas, whether it's the police or it is the teachers, and the ratio to students or the ratio to the population, the areas where you need them the most, whether the money is being channeled there or it goes everywhere else, but it goes under the umbrella of being education.
Yeah, just listening to you now, I'm wondering whether, and I know this is a bit controversial considering the whole geopolitics issue with South Africa and the USA, but the USA have a Department of Government Efficiency being led by Elon Musk. Is that something that we should be considering as a country? Because as you point out, that sometimes you'd find that people make the argument that the state is bloated, but actually, if you look into the services that are required, there are many vacancies that have still not been filled. But it's about prioritizing and where do you put people around to ensure that services are actually delivered.
Well, long before Elon Musk took an interest in politics in the US and has his own eccentric approach to what government efficiency means in a crude fashion, South Africa and the Public Service Commission had long been talking about improving efficiencies in government operations. For example, we often make an example when there is a disaster. You'll find that a committee or several committees from Parliament will fly into the place. Auditor General will go to the place, Human Rights Commissions, Public Service Commission, local committees, local legislatures. All that is the money that comes from government. Instead of them coordinating their activities, sharing the reports, and instead of sending 19 different committees into the space of incident, you simply send one or two to look into that, share the report in order to allow employees to get into the ground in terms of those people who need assistance. That's the kind of efficiency that is targeted, that is smart, that we're talking about. Not a blunt instrument where you simply say, I want to achieve this target, therefore I will cut no matter which services are there, essential or not.
Yeah. Then what has happened to the recommendations then that would have come from the Public Service Commission?
Very often, Chapter 9 constitutional bodies and the Public Service Commission, which is Chapter 10 institution, their recommendations do not get taken seriously for implementation. And most of them say it is less than 20% that gets implemented. And yet these are constitutional bodies which ought to be binding in many ways when they make recommendations. That's where the problem is. And if we are to improve efficiencies, because improvement of government efficiency is one of the core mandates of the Public Service Commission, you would need to make sure that most of those recommendations are implemented. For example, the issue of people staying 8 years, 7 years at home with full pay. How much money, how many millions would you save bringing that back? The issue of visiting the commuted overtime for the doctors, which is not well managed. In some instances, the doctors do not even show up in those institutions where they are supposed to be. Once you scrutinize those very closely, you begin to save, you begin to create opportunities for more other doctors to come into the system. So those are some of the recommendations that I think government need to take seriously. As I said, even if they were to go on and say we still need more money, either from borrowing or taxes, they would have moral authority if we start tightening the belt on how government does things.
Yeah. Has this issue ever been escalated to the presidency? To say that, listen, this is the work that is being done, and I know that there are some amendments that are being proposed as well, to legislation. But this is the work that we have been tasked to be doing. But it almost seems futile considering that only about 20% of our recommendations are being taken in. And these are professionals that we are speaking about. They're not thumb-sucking the data.
Sometime last year, we did meet with the president and we raised some of these, especially the issue of the non-implementation and the poor resourcing of the institutions, constitutional bodies. And he was gracious enough to say we need to have a workshop so that more other ministers are in the meeting. But the other encouraging sign is that Minister of Public Service and Administration and his department, we are working together in order to approach, cabinet, approach parliament to say these are some of the ways of improving efficiency, including professionalization and integration of data, because one of the reasons you have to duplicate certain things, if, for example, you are stopped and somebody is asking, are you a legal or illegal immigrant in the country, you need a Home Affairs person because there is no integrated data to tell. If your license or the license for the car, do you have it or not have it? Is it legitimate or not? Because it is confined in one department instead of it being shared right across. Those are some of the efficiencies that would not only make the state safer, but more productive.
Yeah. Then the capacity of the state and building an ethical and capable state. The president always speaks about this. I don't know if you were following the NYDA interviews and some of the candidates that were being interviewed there. There was a gentleman, a candidate by the name of Zwele Masilela, whose credentials had come into question. But what was evident from that interview was that this is somebody who was at a very junior position, who was parachuted to become a researcher without the necessary qualifications.
If you had an integrated approach as proposed by professionalization framework, then a person who is not qualifying for a particular position would not even make it to the shortlist because it would at one level be integrated. A person who had done wrong in one province would not reappear in another province or in another department. And also you would have a panel of experts who will balance those who might be there using the political muscle only in order to appoint people. That's why shifting into a meritocratic system with all the filters is very much important, because precisely the point, at times not making reference to the NYDA because I've not been following that closely, but generally, when you put a person who may not be qualified, they might need consultants. They might commit this wasteful expenditure, irregular expenditure. They might appoint other people on the basis of loyalty instead of capability or competence. And that's how you make government inefficient.
Yeah. A final one, Prof. What would you like to hear from the Minister of Finance when he delivers his budget speech on Wednesday?
Well, to me, I would want to see a budget speech that is well balanced and it's driven by the strategic priorities of the nation, which in turn, in long term, will stimulate our economy, rather than just focusing on the most urgent issue of how do I balance the budget alone. Because if, for example, you cut on your security, the police, the army, and yet you say for investment to take place, you need a secure environment. For businesses to operate away from the extortionists, you need a secure environment. It means it is a self-defeating approach. You cannot use a lawn mower and cut the grass, cut your vegetable, cut your flowers because you want everything to be leveled. You need to select where the grass is, where the weed is, and where your vegetable is, because you may need your vegetable for your afternoon lunch.
Thank you so much, Prof. Also play a guess on what our reporter Ntokozo Khumalo had been dealing with the 7 colors, or several colors, as she says, of the budget. Thank you so much for making time for us. Somadoda Fikeni, the Public Service Commission chairperson, on expectation.